One, two, three, four. I don't beep ba da da da. When it's and da ba da. When da ba be da da da. It's hip hop. Hi. Hi. My name is Jimmy. How's it going? I go to the comic book store every Wednesday and then I talk about it on the internet. You know, like some kind of lunatic. Anyway, let's get down to picks of the week. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. All right, first up, Ghostbusters Year 1, number 1. This is, I've missed the last couple of Ghostbusters books. Well, I just recently picked them up, but I had to drop, I had to drop a few books last year when I quit working at my old shop, and I've only just been kind of catching up ever since. I'm a huge fan of the film Ghostbusters that came out in 2016. Actually, I do like that movie. I've always loved Ghostbusters. I saw the original in the theater when I was just a little boy, and it's remained one of my favorite films ever since. Unfortunately, every single thing in the Ghostbusters franchise since the original film, not that good. I did like the remake. There were episodes of the real Ghostbusters that I enjoyed as a child. I don't know how well they'd hold up now. But for the most part, like there was a novel that came out that was after Ghostbusters 2, and that sucked. Ghostbusters 2 also sucked. There just hasn't been a lot of good Ghostbusters media. But the comics that Eric Burnham has written for IDW for the last 20 years, it's been a while, maybe not that long, 10, I don't know. They're really good. They're very much in the spirit of the original film. And I'll tell you, really the one thing that always makes a Ghostbusters thing bad is that no one can ever write Peter Venkman's dialogue, and Burnham has an ear for how Bill Murray talks, so it works out. So I'm looking forward to that. I also like Year 1 stories, even though I know the origin of the Ghostbusters pretty well. I like those too, so that'll be also fun. Also, this week, excuse me, we have American Gods, The Moment of the Storm, number 9. This is the final issue of the adaptation of the novel by Neil Gaiman, released in conjunction with the television program that's also an adaptation of the novel that's on Stars. I have not seen the show. It looks good. It's got Swearingen from Deadwood, so that's not a bad thing at all. And he's playing Mr. Wednesday, which is a very good part for him to play. This comic book has been really good. The novel is one of my absolute favorite books. I've read it a couple, 3 times, which is... you have to really like a book to read it a second time. I can tell you that. Like a novel. Aren't I smart? This is also adapted by P. Craig Russell, who worked with Gaiman on the Sandman books occasionally, and he's just a very revered artist himself. But he's also doing a fine job at a script. And then Scott Hampton has done the art for these books. They did it in 3 miniseries of 9 issues each. So, I mean, you might want to just pick up the trades, or maybe they'll put out a whole fat one, but Scott Hampton's art is really good, and I haven't seen him. The first thing I remember seeing Scott Hampton do was this amazing story in an issue of Heavy Metal back in the early 90s, and I even met him that year at Comic-Con and got him to sign that issue and everything, and I can only imagine he's done stuff since, but I can't think of anything. I'm sure he probably makes a living doing art or illustration outside of the comic book industry, which is how you do things, because comics do not pay that well, or so I'm told. And then finally this week we have I got kind of a twofer here. American Jesus, The New Messiah, number 1 and 2. So back in, I want to say 03, somewhere around there, Mark Millar, the writer of such titles as Kick-Ass and Wanted, you might recognize those because they made them into movies. He wrote a book called Chosen, and it was about a young boy in the American Midwest who exhibited very Christ-like powers, and so was thought to be the second coming. I don't want to spoil that for you in case you haven't read a 15-year-old comic book yet, but he's finally getting around to the second one. They renamed it American Jesus a few years back when it was collected. Millar, as you might have guessed, when he writes a comic book, he's always thinking of the secondary adaptation market, whether it's a television show or a movie or something like that. So Chosen was supposed to be made into a film, I want to say like 10 years ago, and the movie was called American Jesus, so they immediately rebranded the comic book that when they released it as a trade. So this is the second part I don't know whatever happened in the movie, or maybe he's trying to jumpstart interest in the movie again by releasing another series, but it's I really like the first one. Peter Gross is drawing this one, and I'm not familiar with that name. I don't know if he drew the first one or not, but I'll let you know next week, I guess. Okay, so that was picks of the week. Now picks of last week. All right. So, let's see. What do I want to talk about first? Oh, we'll do this one first. All right. So, last week I talked about Undiscovered Country number 3. And as I noted then, it is drawn by the very good artist Giuseppe Camuncoli. And his art is on grand display here. Sorry, I went to the Bahamas for a second. Camuncoli is very Dennis Cowan-y, although I might only be thinking that because Dennis Cowan drew one of the other comics that I read for this coming week. Was that all I wanted to say about that? Yes, it is. But it's a really good book. At this point, you might want to just wait for the first trade because it's 3 issues in, and so it'd probably be 2 or 3 more issues before they collect it. They're a lot quicker at that sort of thing. It seems like they're only getting quicker by the day, or by the week anyway. Also, last week we talked about... I talked about Skull Digger and Skeleton Boy. This is issue number 2. And like I was saying last week, it is based in Jeff Lemire's Black Hammer universe, which is a very thinly disguised version of the DC universe. This is his Batman story. And if there was any doubt in my mind that this was a Batman story, they introduced a Renee Montoya-ish character. So it's, clearly a Batman story. And again, like I think I said this last week, I like to think that because Jeff Lemire is a big DC guy, and he's written for DC extensively, but they probably didn't let him do everything, so he just took all the ideas he pitched that they didn't take and just did it himself. Similar thing happened with, who was it? Paul Pope, I think, wanted to do a Commandy story, and DC said no, so he just went ahead and did it his own. Same with Frank Miller, wanted to do Batman versus Osama bin Laden. That is a true thing. They wouldn't let him, so he just did it on his own. You know, obviously changing the names and the basic designs, but they're pretty clearly meant to be those. And my favorite is Mark Waid's Superman stories that he got to do with Irredeemable. No, Irredeemable was the spinoff of the book I'm trying to think of. Oh, sorry. Anyway, it's good. And then finally, speaking of Jeff Lemire, we had The Question, The Deaths of Vic Sage, number 2. This is on the black label, so it has F words in it. This was an amazing story. I'm already a huge fan of The Question, but the fact that this was set in the Old West was a big deal to me, and it's definitely some of Cowan's best stuff. Maybe I'm just saying that because it's been a long time since I've seen Dennis Cowan draw anything, but it's super good. The only problem I have with this issue is that apparently the 3rd issue won't be out until April. The first issue came out in November, so if you're going to do it every other month, fine. But now I got to wait 3 more months? This is the worst possible existence. Oh, good Lord. Picks of last week. Okay, so what else did I want to talk to you about? Oh, yes, of course. So what else have I been reading? I should make a board for that. I've been reading, I went back and revisiting The Mask from Dark Horse Comics, and also I started over East of West, which I threatened to do. If you live in the Los Angeles area, the local library has an app for ebooks that you can borrow for free, and I read it on my Kindle. So that's where I'm reading those. If you do live in LA, or really any decent sized library ought to have this app for something. So I highly recommend that. I've also, like I said, I picked up some of those Ghostbusters I was missing, but my favorite thing that I've acquired this week is this here book, Ralph's Snart Adventures, Let's Get Naked. This is a trade paperback of a comic book that started in the mid-'80s, and it was one of the first books I ever got into. It was a humor book, very cartoonish and silly book, that I probably shouldn't have been reading at 11 years old, but it's not. Actually, there's excessive drinking, but that's about it. But I spent the weekend in Tucson, and the last time, doing comedy, and the last time I had been there, I'd gone to a shop called Fantasy Comics, which is a really great shop. If you're in Tucson, check it out. They had this book, and I was like very tempted to buy it, but I technically own all this stuff. I just really kind of wanted to read it again without having to dig it out. But I didn't. And then I regretted it every day since. And then I went and bought it this week, and I'm very excited. Also because it's very out of print, and they only charged me cover price for it, which was nice of them. Thanks, guys. All right, that's it, everybody, for this week. Oh, and next week I have a comedy show in San Diego, California. So if you're in the area, come check me out. I'm going to be opening for Beth Stelling at the Whistle Stop Bar in South Park, and not Colorado, but California. But therefore I'll probably have to leave straight from work, so I won't get a chance to go to the shop until Thursday. So if you don't see one until next week, I don't want to hear about it. Adam, he knows who he is. All right, I think that's it for this week then, everybody. Yep. Okay, bye. Just making sure I have the right one.